Good evening, brothers and sisters in the Dhamma. Kindly off your handset before the Dhamma talk starts. We are privileged to have with us Brother Billy Tan as our speaker for today under the SRI DHAMMANANDA Lecture Series 2015 under the theme of Living with the Dhamma. Brother Billy Tan is a business development consultant and professional trainer who has been training corporate executives and business professionals from more than 20 countries over the past 25 years. Brother Billy is a certified master practitioner of Neuro-Linguistic Program, NLP, and a certified Six Sigma Black Belt practitioner, as well as being certified in clinical hypnotherapy. In recent years, Brother Billy has conducted several professional training programs for resident and visiting monks at Buddhist Maha Vihara Brickfields in the area of emotional intelligence, communication, professional presentation, public relation, community services, leadership and management. In sharing the Dhamma, Brother Billy studies under the guidance of Venerable Dr. M. Punaji Mahathera and enjoys connecting findings from neuroscience and psychology to present teachings of the Buddha from a modern and scientific perspective. Currently, Brother Billy offers talks, seminars, workshops, and professional training programs to Buddhist community centers and charity organizations. Today, Brother Billy will be giving a talk on Buddhism as a Psychotherapy, Calming the Mental Proliferations. Thank you.
Good evening, brothers and sisters in the Dhamma. It is a pleasure to be back in Malaysia. I just came back from a Dhamma Duta tour of the Philippines. Had a very exciting time. In fact, this was the hottest topic that was requested by many groups. And in fact, on my very last evening before I left, I was specially requested to deliver this to a group of Catholic nuns and priests. Very interesting. So it was a very interesting experience for me. And the original title, topic title, is actually Buddhism as a Psychotherapy, Calming Mental Proliferation. In order to make it easily accessible to people who are not necessarily from a Buddhist background, when during my Dhamma Duta tour, I actually just changed the name to Mindfulness as a Psychotherapy. Basically, it's the same. We're talking about the Buddha's teaching in mindfulness, or what is known as Satipatthana. So basically, it's the same sharing. Mindfulness as a psychotherapy is very helpful for us to calm our mental proliferation. Mental proliferation is basically the mind being wandering off into the past, about problems from the past, regrets from the past, or sometimes wandering off to the future with our fears and anxieties of the future, or wandering to whatever that is going on around us, being fearful of changes, being unhappy and dissatisfied with present situations. The way the mind wanders around is what I call mental proliferation. This usually arises with our emotional excitement whenever we see, hear, smell, taste, or touch anything in our environment that triggers our memory, our imagination, and our expectations. Memory leads us to the past, imagination leads us to the future, and expectation takes us to our present moment where we expect things to change, but of course we are never satisfied with what we have around us, and that is what leads to a lot of unhappiness, where some people call that suffering, but it's basically unhappiness and dissatisfactoriness. So today's sharing is exploring it from a scientific perspective. I will be explaining from this field of psychology and neuroscience how we get stressed and our mind gets severely disturbed by these emotional excitements. So we explore from a scientific perspective how we can apply the teachings of the Buddha in Satipatthana, or mindfulness as it is commonly translated. application of the teachings of the Buddha on mindfulness as a psychotherapeutic solution for a more peaceful and happier life. It has been said by my teacher, Venerable Dr. Punaji, that the purpose of human intelligence is not just to seek the truth. What's the point of seeking the truth if this truth doesn't help you? So the purpose of human intelligence is really to find solutions, to solve problems that we experience. So it's not just about seeking the truth, but it is about solving problems in our lives. So the application of the Buddha's teaching in mindfulness will help us maintain a more peaceful and happier life in practicing this on a daily basis. So first we will take a look at the Buddha's teaching, how environmental stimulations stimulate our sense organ, and this gives rise to the feeling of pleasant and unpleasant feelings in the environment. And this feeling is really not an emotional feeling, it is just a sensory feeling. When things that we see, hear, smell, taste or touch arouse this feeling of pleasant or unpleasant, and this is called Vedana, the feeling that it is pleasant or unpleasant from our sense organs. And this could lead to emotional arousal. This arousal is inevitable, we can't avoid it, it happens all the time. And it could also lead to emotional excitement. With this emotional arousal and emotional excitement, we begin to react. And this reaction is called tanha. And tanha is often translated as craving, but my teacher, Venerable Dr. Punaji, points out more accurately that tanha is really the way we react. And this reaction can be lustful towards pleasant sensations or can be hateful towards unpleasant sensations. So this lust and greed towards pleasant sensations, that would be called lobha. And this aversion and hatred towards unpleasant sensation, that is dosa. And that is how we normally react. And these are reactions called tanha. And at the same time, whenever we experience anything from the environment, we have a tendency to personalize every experience. Even our suffering, we personalize. The pain, we personalize. The pleasure, we personalize. And this process of personalization in Pali is called upadana. And upadana is often translated as clinging, sometimes translated as attachment. Basically, we become attached and cling on to our experiences. Experiences from the past, experiences that hasn't happened yet that we foresee could happen in the future, or our present experiences. And with this clinging, with this personalization of our experiences, it leads to the notion that there is a self to be affected. And this notion that there is a self to be affected, that is called moha. That's why you have these three roots of unwholesome behavior: lobha, dosa, and moha. Moha is this personalization of our experiences, leading to the delusion that there is a self to be affected. Because every time something happens, we always think, oh, it is personal. It is making me feel painful. And this me is the personalization process, the I, me, and mine syndrome. And more importantly, the purpose of understanding the practice of Satipatthana. And today, I'm actually elaborating not so much on the meditation process of Satipatthana, but rather a very practical, useful way, the day-to-day practical application of Satipatthana, or what is commonly called mindfulness. Learn how to relax the body, calm the mind of these lustful or hateful reactions through this thing called introspective awareness. My teacher translates Satipatthana as introspective awareness of the body and the mind. And there are 4 areas of focuses, which is commonly translated as the 4 foundations of mindfulness. But these are really the 4 focuses of introspective awareness, or 4 focuses of introspection. That's what we're going to look at today. First, we look at what is called mind. And the Buddha, throughout the sutras, have mentioned there are 3 parts of mental experiences. And these three parts of mental experiences, it is often collectively translated as the word mind. But we should be able to differentiate that they actually refer to different kinds of mental experiences. The first one arises with our sense organs from the central nervous system, where the sense organs are being stimulated by the environment, and there is a process of perception arising, leading to the perception of what our sense organs have picked up. And this is actually the result of this panchakanda. And this process of perception that arises, giving rise to perception, this is vijnana, the perception of what our sense organs have perceived from the environment. So this is the first part of the mental experiences as a result of our central nervous system. Then when that arises, it comes another part of mental experience at the same time, which is called the cognitive process. And this is in Pali, mano. Basically, this is our way of categorizing and interpreting the perception. So we interpret perceptions based on categorized manner and give meaning to what was perceived. And this is the part of the mind called mano, or commonly called cognitive process. In layman's term, this is the part of the mind we come to understand as the intellect, to do with our ability to think rationally, reasonably, and intelligently. Then there is another part of the mind which is our emotional mind, and this is the affective process. This is called citta in Pali. And this is basically the way the mind reacts to pleasant and unpleasant sensations. And these sensations or feelings, they arouse the emotions, leading to emotional excitement and our reactions. So this is the part of the mind that is aroused with these pleasant and unpleasant feelings, and this is called citta, the emotional part of our mind, commonly called affective process. And from there, we begin to personalize the experience. It is this part of the mind that personalizes the experience, with the notion there is a self to be affected. That's why the notion of self arises with this aspect, this part of the mind. So these are the three parts of mental experiences mentioned throughout the various sutras in the Nikayas. And unfortunately, many translators do not differentiate these three kinds of mental experiences, especially between mano and citta. They basically collectively call it mind. And when we think of it as mind, it sometimes is a bit difficult to appreciate what aspect of the mind. Is it the intellect or is it the emotions? So today I will explain to you which aspect of mind is the intellect and which aspect of the mind is the emotion. Then you can get a better understanding of our mental experiences. When we speak of consciousness, there are two things happening in this body that is conscious of its environment. And this body, we often call it by the name we are given, but actually we can just refer to it as an organism in an environment. We are basically organisms in an environment. Animals are organisms in an environment, in the same environment. Plants are organisms. Basically, organisms have a lifespan. They arise, they are born, and then they live until they age, and finally they die off. Right? So during this process of living, it is in the human body, it is the process of metabolism that keeps us alive. This is the life-sustaining process going on in the body, where the cells divide, and the strong cells survive, the weaker cells die off, and in this whole process of cells dividing, we continue to grow, we continue to age, and sometimes these cells may end up with certain defects or may have certain unhealthy aspects of it, and then we experience sickness. And finally, as these cells continue to multiply, they can no longer sustain the body, and we may die off in the end, or we could die off for other reasons. So this is the whole process of metabolism that keeps us alive. There is another process as a result of the way our body has evolved. We have evolved with our central nervous system and 5 sense organs. which help us to sense the environment. So we are able to experience the environment through this central nervous system and 5 sense organs, enabling us to see, to hear, to smell, to taste, and to touch the environment through these 5 senses. And with that, it leads to the experience of consciousness. But our consciousness today is greatly disturbed by a lot of things going on around us. So our consciousness is continuously being disturbed by activities in the environment, stimulated by activities in the environment, and some of these activities can be very stressful. They are not stress by itself. Environmental activities put pressure on us. And it is this pressure that is placed upon us that leads to the body feeling stressed and the mind getting stressed over it. So there are really 2 kinds of stress: a physical stress, which is the body experiencing physiological stress, and there is a mental stress, a psychological stress, as a result of the way we interpret our circumstances, the way we think, the way we perceive, the way we interpret what we perceive. That leads to psychological stress. So I'll explain that a little bit more in a moment. We take a look at this central nervous system in a nutshell. Now, I'm not trying to go too deep into these scientific things or medical things. I'm just going to briefly explain some very important aspect which can be very useful. If you understand this very basic level of science, it can help you understand what is going on inside your body and your mind. So the basic understanding here is the simple understanding of what is the central nervous system. It is made of 2 main parts: spinal cord and the brain. The spinal cord is connected to the rest of the body through our peripheral nervous system, and this peripheral nervous system in turn connects to sense organs, to the ears, to the eyes, nose, tongue, and the body. And these sense organs basically pick up environmental activities that are stimulating the sense organs, and this information is then carried through the spinal cord, leading to the brain, and the brain begins to react. And when the brain reacts, it sends messages and instructions down the spinal cord to the various parts of the body to take action. It could cause the muscles to tense up. It could cause various organs to react in different ways. We will examine how this reaction takes place. Most of this reaction is unconscious. Most of this reaction we cannot really control. We can only control the part of the reaction where we consciously think of a thought and think of certain specific action we want to take. And that is the only part of the reaction we can control. But the other kinds of reaction that lead to physiological stress, we are not able to control. And I'll show you why. If we take a look at the brain, it is made of 3 main parts. The oldest part is called the brain stem, which is responsible for our survival. That's why it's called the survival brain. This is the part of the brain that regulates autonomic functions in the body. Our respiration, the way oxygen is then taken in and converted from the lungs, and our digestive system, the way that the intestinal system digests food, the heart rate and blood pressure, the way the heart beats. We can't control these functions. We can only do things to help them, but we can't control them. The heartbeat, for instance, heart rate, we can't control heart rate. But what we can do is relax. And when we learn to relax, the heart rate can slow down a bit. We can't control our blood pressure, but what we can do is learn to relax, learn to meditate, and that might help us bring down the blood pressure. So we can do things to help improve physiological functions, but we can't control these functions. And that is controlled by this part of the brain called the brain stem. Then comes the next layer in the brain. Right? The next layer is called the limbic system. This is commonly called the emotional command center, or simply the emotional brain. This is the part of the brain that is responsible for releasing hormones and acids and enzymes throughout the body, chemical reactions in the body. And it is these chemical reactions that begin the process of emotions. Until about 150 years ago, scientists were not sure what really is emotion. Many think of emotion in a spiritual way. They think of emotions as some kind of spiritual response to our environment, and as a result of this thing called self and spirit and soul. But there are also people who thought that emotion is purely mental. Emotion is just thoughts, negative thoughts or positive thoughts. But 150 years ago, scientists have begun to recognize emotion is not just mental. Emotion begins with a physiological process, a biochemical activity in the body, and this biochemical reaction in the body kicks off the whole process of emotions, and then only it becomes mental. And we will examine how emotion begins in a physiological way, a physical way, before it becomes mental or psychological. And that is the result of activities in the limbic system, the emotional brain. And then the third part of the brain is the cerebral cortex, what is commonly called the learning brain. Right? And this is the part of the brain that helps us think, rationalize, reason out, and remember what we experience, and recall our experiences. So this is the cerebral cortex, commonly called the learning brain, or also the thinking brain. It is learning because thinking combined with memory is learning. So learning process is the process of thinking and also remembering and recalling what we remember. So that is called the learning brain. Now, most importantly, the part of the brain that causes us a lot of suffering, a lot of stress, a lot of unhappiness in life is the middle part, the limbic system. And this is a research that was done about 25 years ago by a scientist by the name of Joseph Ledoux. He pointed out there is a part inside this limbic system that is causing a lot of our pain and suffering. And the important thing is we've got to learn how to tame it. Deep inside this emotional brain, the emotional command center, is a part of the brain called, a small structure in the brain called the amygdala. The amygdala is a very tiny little structure. It's about the size of your thumbnail. There are two of it, and because we have two hemispheres in the brain, so basically on each side there is an amygdala. So we have two amygdalas. And these two amygdalas, what are they responsible for? They scan environmental inputs as well as bodily sensations for signs of potential threats and harm and danger to the organism. That means every time we see, hear, smell, taste, or touch something, that information goes through the amygdala. And the amygdala senses whether or not there is any threat to the organism. It is picking up things like loud noise. See, the amygdala cannot think. It is not intelligent, but it is able to scan to look at the nature of the perception that is being picked up by our sense organ. That means it is sensing for loud noise. It is sensing for fast approaching objects. It is sensing for heat to the body. It is sensing for various disturbances to our sense organs. And when it detects what is potentially a threat, like loud noise, fast approaching object, high temperature in our environment, it then causes a chain reaction. And this chain reaction is the stress reaction. This is basically leading to feelings of discomfort, frustration, anxiety, anger, fear, panic, and so on. And this is actually the freeze, fight, or flight reaction, commonly called by psychologists. Freeze, fight, or flight reaction, where we either freeze as a result of not knowing what has just happened, or we might want to fight against the threat when we have experienced this before and we don't like it, we want to fight against it, or we might want to run away knowing that we are not capable of fighting against it. So the freeze, fight, or flight reaction. And basically, the amygdala has a paradoxical role. The first part I have just explained, this is actually serving as a bodyguard. Right? It actually helps to protect us from harm. It is there to sense these environmental inputs and bodily sensations to pick up for signs of threats and danger to the organism. And it reacts. So this is the role of the amygdala, which is like a bodyguard. But at the same time, the amygdala can be unnecessarily aroused, unnecessarily activated. And when it does, it causes this stress reaction. And this is the part of the amygdala which behaves like a terrorist. So actually, the amygdala has this paradoxical role. It is both the bodyguard in our brain to help protect us, as well as a terrorist in the brain to cause a lot of stress reaction in the body. And what kind of unnecessary stress reaction? Take, for example, you're walking down the street. And as you're walking down the street happily, through the corner of your eye, you see a fast approaching object. And somewhere it could be a truck coming towards you that went off the road. It could be a motorcycle that went off the road coming towards you. And what happens? What does the mind do? Does the mind think, oh, I have just seen something coming towards me. Let me take a good look what it is. And then you figure out what it is. Oh, it is a truck and it is coming towards me. If this truck continues to come towards me and if I don't step out of the way, I will get run over the truck and I'll get run over by the truck and I will die. That is not good. Now, it is time for me to jump out of the way. Is that what the mind does? No, that's not what the mind does. As soon as you see a fast approaching object, the mind doesn't even have time to think. Your whole body reacts and jumps out of the way. That is a reaction of the amygdala. Because the amygdala senses a fast approaching object, triggers biochemical reaction that causes the muscle to tense and causes various parts of the body to move, to react, and the whole body, by way of evolutionary conditioning, it jumps out of the way to avoid being run over by this fast approaching object. Now, this fast approaching object could be a truck that got out of the road, but it could also be your good friend who happens to be walking nearby and see you and quickly come towards you. Now, if your good friend is coming towards you, that is not a danger, but the amygdala cannot differentiate between these two. It picks up the signal that there is a fast approaching object. And when it sees a fast approaching object, it causes the body to react. The same thing. You could be sitting there reading a book. Let's say you're sitting in the cafe, peacefully reading your book and happily engrossed in reading your book. And a good friend of yours happened to pass by behind you and notice you and come towards you. And without you realizing, he taps you on the shoulder and says, "Hello, how are you?" Now what happens then when you are peacefully reading a book and suddenly somebody comes from behind and taps you on the shoulder? Your whole body reacts. You get spooked. This spooked reaction is actually the reaction of the amygdala. And this is what I mean by the amygdala can be unnecessarily aroused. That's why it can become a terrorist in the brain when it is unnecessarily aroused too frequently. So in other words, it causes the body to experience this stress reaction. And basically, the amygdala is something that has been researched very thoroughly in recent times. It's only since about 25 years ago that what the amygdala is responsible for has become more clearly known. Before that, scientists had a vague idea, but they were not very clear. So this is fairly recent times, recent science that brings us this information about why we get so stressed. So let's take a look at this process of experience and how we experience stress first before we look at how we can tame our mind. Environmental activities stimulate our sense organs, causing the arousal and stimulation of activities in the eye, the ear, the nose, tongue, and the body. And this process is actually commonly called the 5 aggregates, panchakanda. And that leads to the arising of vijnana, the perception of something we have just sensed in the environment. Having perceived something out there by way of seeing, hearing, smelling, tasting, and touching. This perception is the first part of mental experience called vijnana. With this arising of perception arises also another part of mental experience called mano, and this is the cognitive process. Mano arises to interpret what has just been perceived. At the same time, what has been perceived has a feeling of whether pleasant or unpleasant, and sometimes also neither pleasant nor unpleasant. But most of the time it is pleasant or unpleasant. And with pleasant or unpleasant feelings arises the third part of the mental experience called chitta. And this is this is the affective process. Basically, the cognitive process tries to interpret what is this that I have just experienced. And the affective process tries to interpret how does this affect me. That's why it's called the affective process. And whenever the affective process arises as a result of these pleasant or unpleasant feelings, it triggers a chain reaction in the body. It triggers a biochemical chain reaction called the autonomic biochemical reaction of the organism. And this is actually a series of biochemical reaction in the body that leads to tension in the body. Various parts of the body begins to feel tensed. And this is totally unconscious in the sense that it arises without our control. Even from simply seeing, hearing, smelling, tasting, touching something. I can say something simple like asam laksa, for instance. Some of you may begin to feel sourness in your mouth. And that sourness in your mouth is the result of biochemical reactions that has just happened, causing the feeling of sourness in your mouth. And that is a kind of tension in the body. But there could be something worse than that. Right? There could be other worse conditions. I'll give you an example. If you remember in your childhood, you went to school. In those days, the teacher writes on the board. In those days, they were not using whiteboard and marker pen. What were they using? Blackboard and chalk. And of course, when the teacher writes on the board with a brand new chalk, it makes sounds like squeak, 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 that kind of sound. And of course, there are some kids, very naughty, with long nails. What do they like to do? They like to scratch the board and it goes, ee. Now, right now, how many of you are feeling some kind of tingling sensation in your body? Yeah? There you are. Quite a few of you are experiencing this tingling sensation in the body. What has just happened? You heard me say something, and the result of having heard it, it triggers a biochemical reaction in your body, causing your bodily sensations. That's really what has happened. Tensions in the body as a result of biochemical reaction in the body, which you cannot control. But what you can control is what you do afterwards. Right? That's why there is this first part of the experience, the emotional experience, which is physiological. And from these tensions in the body, it leads to bodily sensation, that tingling sensation you are experiencing. And this is really a kind of dukkha, a kind of suffering, to put it in more severely. Right? For lack of a better word, we call it stress. Right? So this is the part of the experience which is dukkha or stress, physical stress. This is really the physiological disturbance in the body, physical stress that leads to fight or flight reaction. Which means if it is something you have experienced before, now you're experiencing it, you either want to fight against it, you want to resist it, or you want to run away from it, you want to get rid of it. Right? So it's either a fight or flight reaction. So this is the physiological disturbance we call stress. And what happens in this stress reaction? First, the amygdala picks up this potential threat reaction, potential threat stimulations, and then starts to send a message to the glands. So the amygdala from the brain begins to send message to the gland. One of the glands that receive this message is the adrenal gland. The adrenal gland is located directly above the kidneys. So we have two kidneys, one on each side of the body. So there are two adrenal glands directly above the kidneys. When this adrenal gland receives this message from the brain, it releases two very powerful hormones, adrenaline and cortisol, which then floods the body through the bloodstream. It gets circulated carried through the various parts of the body, to various organs in the body through the blood circulation. And when it reaches different organs, various organs react in specific ways. For instance, when it reaches the heart, it causes the heart to beat faster. It causes the blood pressure to rise in order to increase circulation of blood throughout the body. This is actually helping to protect the organism. This increase in blood circulation helps to pass this message throughout the body, as well as circulate more oxygen. So when these hormones reach the lungs, it causes the respiration to deepen. That means it takes on more oxygen. You breathe more rapidly in order to increase oxygen intake, because oxygen is actually fuel or energy for the cells, and it is carried throughout the body through the blood circulation. So these two are working in tandem. Your heart beating faster and your lungs breathing deeper in order to circulate very quickly oxygen throughout the body for you to react to the threat. And when this cortisol reaches the intestinal system, it suspends your digestive system. The reason is that when you take any food, the digestive system begins to act, and the process of digestive system draws a lot of energy from the rest of your body. It draws a lot of energy away from your brain. That's why after a very heavy meal, if you attend a Dhamma talk or you attend a meeting after a heavy lunch, you get very sleepy, very drowsy, simply because your digestive system is drawing a lot of energy away from your brain. And because of that, your brain doesn't have enough energy to sustain high level of attention or attentiveness, so you get drowsy. Now, because of this threat, cortisol automatically stops the digestive system in order to release all this energy, so that you now have more energy to conserve the energy to fight against the threat. And at the same time, when adrenaline reaches your muscles, it causes all the muscles to tense up. Various muscles start to tense up and start to react, so that you are able to fight against the threat. If it is a physical threat, you are able to push it away or fight against it. Or if it is something you cannot counter, maybe it is too strong for you, you may want to run away. So it causes various parts of the muscles to tense up, getting ready to fight or to run. And when it reaches other parts of the body, it causes your hair to stand on end. Of course, this is actually a remnant of evolutionary past. As you may know, some of these organisms or some of these animals with very long hair, body hair, when hair stands on end, it makes the animal look much bigger. This is a way to frighten away predator. But of course, today, the way we have evolved, we no longer have all this. We are no longer hairy apes. We don't have this long hair. We have this quarter-inch hair. When it stands on end, it hardly makes us look any bigger. But we experience it in the form of goosebumps. Right? When you feel goosebumps or goose pimple, that is your hair standing on end. And then pupils dilate so that we are able to capture more clearly what is going on, increasing, enhancing your vision. And at the same time, it causes facial expression to distort, make you look more fierce. This is again remnant of evolutionary past. Making you look more fierce so that you are able to counter against or resist against the threat. Make you look more powerful, more stronger to frighten away your predator. This is why animals, even small little animals, when they are threatened by a predator, they look very fierce. They want to frighten off their predator. Humans are no different. When we are threatened, our facial expression distorts. Right? And there are also other reactions. Body may tremble, and we may perspire a lot, perspiration, and then body temperature rises and so on. Now, you take a look at what's going on there. You see the cat on the top left corner. That is hair standing on end. You can see that. Right? And of course, animals with long hair, you can see it going on. And then on the top right corner, you see the pupils dilate, open up, and then to catch more light. Facial expression distort. And you can also see in the guy who is driving behind the wheel that his facial expression also distorts. And then muscles are all tensed up. His hands are all tensed up. All these are reactions, stress reactions. Now we have to be careful about this facial expression distorting. Because there are various parts of our face, when it distorts too much, it leads to wrinkling of the face. And we call this railway tracks on the face. Right? We may experience this railway tracks. And guys, don't laugh. It is not just the ladies who get it. Right? Men also get it. Right? So we are all not free from this. Facial expression distorts, and that could lead to wrinkly face. In fact, you can see people who've had a very emotional life, chances are you will find a lot of wrinkles in the face. it's partly because of that, not entirely, but partly could be caused by an emotional life. Whereas some people, if they smile a lot, they don't get a lot of wrinkles. Right? If they're happy most of the time, they don't get so much wrinkles. Even by the time they're 60 or later, they still have very smooth skin, like mine. Yeah, so basically that is people who smile a lot, whereas people with emotional life, they get a lot of wrinkles. And other things happen with this stress reaction. It causes blood sugar level to rise in order to help aid metabolism, converting stored energy to active energy so that you now have energy to fight against or run away from the threat. And at the same time, it causes the body immune system to be suspended. Because the body immune system may try to prevent some of these things from happening. Now, cortisol is so powerful. It can suspend your digestive system. It can suspend your body immune system. You look at all this reaction, the stress reaction that is going on. Is it healthy for you? If your body immune system is suspended frequently, what happens to you? You can easily fall sick. You can easily catch diseases from the environment, from bacteria in the environment. Very easily. What happens if your sugar level rises too much? You become diabetic. What happens when you perspire too much? You get dehydration. And what happens if you tremble too much? Your body temperature rising too much. It causes unhealthy body. What happens if your facial expression distort too much? You get wrinkles all over the face. What happens if your pupils dilate too frequently? Well, it weakens your vision. Before you get too old, your vision becomes very weak. You're not able to see too clearly as you age. And what happens when your hair stands on end too frequently? Well, before you know it, there's no more hair to stand on end. Right? And what happens when your muscles get all tense? And all of us experience it. What kind of things we experience? Muscle tension, body ache, neck ache, shoulder ache, back ache, all kinds of ache, right? And it causes various parts of the body to be all tensed up and all stressed and full of aches here and there, muscle tension. Very often we need to go for our massage therapy in order to help relieve that. But that is not a long-term solution. Right? And what happens if your digestive system is suspended too frequently in the middle of digesting food? Well, all the acids and the enzymes that are released, they flood your bowel system. They are very corrosive. And they could cause damage to any possible ulcers that you may have, worsening your ulcer condition. And what happens if your respiration deepens too much? It actually causes asthmatic condition or hyperventilation. You go too much. And that is not good for your body also. And the last one, what happens if your heart beats too fast and your blood pressure rises too frequently? When blood pressure rises too much, what happens? You experience hypertension. People get high blood pressure because of that. And we know, a lot of scientists have pointed out that the heart is only capable of beating so many times in a lifetime. Now, if for some unknown reason it begins to beat too frequently, too fast, too often, what happens? It shortens our life. So you can see all this is very unhealthy to us. We got to learn how to break away from that. Carrying on, what then happens emotionally? Now that part is the physiological reaction. In fact, emotions come in two dimensions. The physiological part, which we have just examined, the bodily reaction. And the second part is the psychological part, the mental part. Because of these changes in bodily, in the organs in the body, and this feeling of changes, bodily sensations that we are experiencing, it disturbs the mind. It arouses more reactions in the affective process. And when that is aroused, right, we begin to react. So emotions come with two main activities. The first is arousal, and the second is reaction. With arousal, basically, it is the result of whether the feeling is pleasant or unpleasant. This feeling is actually the sensations from the environmental activity. This is not, at this point in time, it is not an emotional feeling, not that mental feeling we're talking about. This is sensory feeling. It is either pleasant or unpleasant, and as a result of this pleasant and unpleasant feeling, it triggers the memory, imagination, expectation to arise. And then the mind begins to be excited, right? This is psychological arousal. With this emotional excitement, that is when it leads to mental proliferation. We begin to want more of something that is pleasant or pleasurable. Or we want to avoid or get rid of something that is unpleasant or painful. Or in the case where it is neither pleasant nor unpleasant, we begin to have this delusion of the existence of a self, that is, there is a self to be affected. So this wanting more of pleasant and pleasurable experience is called lobha. And this wanting to get rid of this unpleasant or painful experience, that is called dosa. And the delusion of the existence of a self that is being affected by this experience, that is called moha. So we have lobha, dosa, and moha. And with lobha, dosa, and moha, they actually disturb our rational thinking. And this disturbance is the psychological disturbance. For lack of a better word, we call the psychological disturbance distress. And we call the physiological disturbance stress. So we are experiencing two things. The physiological disturbance we call stress, and the psychological disturbance we call distress. So with that, there is a tug-of-war going on between the thinking part of the mind, the reasoning part of the mind, and the feeling part of the mind, the mental disturbances, between the cognitive process and this affective process. So this tug-of-war that is going on. So let's take a look at this chain reaction. If it is not taken care of, what happens? How can it hurt us? So when we're experiencing physiological stress, and this psychological arousal begins to disturb the mind, leading to psychological distress. And if we don't take good care of it, this psychological distress could actually trigger more biochemical reaction. And with more biochemical reaction, it actually disturbs the mind even further. And this disturbance can go out of control and become a vicious cycle. And this vicious cycle continuously disturbs the mind. And this is commonly called amygdala hijack. In fact, this leads to deep depression. See, emotional distress is a mild form of depression. If it is not addressed, not taken care of, it could lead to deep depression, chronic depression. And that can even lead to another condition called post-traumatic stress disorder. When we remember something that is traumatic, and an experience that has disturbed us, and that continues to disturb us further, releasing more and more hormones, right? This chain reaction, getting worse and worse, getting out of control, then we experience post-traumatic stress disorder. This is very, very unhealthy. When you reach that condition, you can no longer take care of yourself. You need external help. You need psychiatric or medical help. Some people may need medication to help bring down this level of biochemical disruption in the body. So basically, emotion begins with a biochemical reaction in the body that leads to psychological disturbances or excitement, and then mental proliferation. So basically today we're going to look at how we can tame this psychological disturbance. Now, human beings, right? The human being is the only species of animal that regrets the past, is fearful of the future, and dissatisfied with the present moment. Right? This is a very common condition. Now, I hope none of you are having this experience, but I'll use this as an example. For instance, let's say you're living at home with an elderly person, and maybe a grandmother or grand aunt who is not able to cook for herself. She might be disabled, or she might not be strong enough to do any cooking. So she depends on you to cook early in the morning, prepare the food for all the 3 meals before you go to office, so that she has something to eat for the rest of the day. But at the same time, you might have a dog at home that you put some food on the tray, and then you go away and you let the dog take care of itself, taking food from the tray. And that is going on daily. One morning you get a phone call from the office, there is an emergency, you got to rush to the office, something has happened, and you thought, oh, you just go to the office very quickly to settle the emergency, come back and cook for your elderly aunt or elderly grandmother or feed your dog. So you rush off, but unfortunately you're stuck in the office for the rest of the day. And then you come home late in the evening. You did not cook anything for the elderly person, you did not give up any food for your dog. When you come home late in the evening, how do you think the elderly person is going to greet you? Do you think the elderly person is going to greet you with a great big smile and say, oh, welcome home, it's good to see you home? Or most likely, the elderly person is going to frown, very unhappy that you did not cook, and maybe very upset, why didn't you cook before you leave the house? What do you think? Happy greeting or unhappy greeting? Most of the time, unhappy greeting, yeah? So the human being will respond with an unhappy greeting at that moment. How do you think your dog is going to greet you? Do you think the dog is going to growl at you and say, oh, you didn't feed me this morning, you know? Do you think the dog is going to do that? Or the dog sees you come home, wagging the tail very happily and run towards you, right? Happy greeting or unhappy greeting? The dog will give you a happy greeting. So now you can see human beings do not live in the moment. Because what is happening in the moment? You are coming home. That is a happy moment. The dog is happy to see you come home. But the human beings remembered what happened earlier in the day. That she is hungry, that you never cooked the food for her. That's why human beings, the human being is the only species that doesn't live in the moment. We regret the past, we are fearful of the future, and we are dissatisfied with the present moment. And there is another human expression which is not healthy, right? That is, we learn to cling on to these experiences. We're going to learn to let go. And the process of learning to let go and live in the moment, that is commonly called mindfulness. Basically, mindfulness is a process where we practice a certain applications that help us place our attention in the present moment and learn to appreciate the present moment so that we don't end up getting caught with regretting the past, fearful of the future, and becoming dissatisfied with what's going on. Because we do not heal the past by dwelling in there. We heal the past by living fully in the present, by appreciating and enjoying the present moment. But people don't do that. People have a hard time letting go of their suffering. And out of fear of the unknown, they prefer suffering that is familiar. And this is a classic problem. And Venerable Thich Nhat Hanh pointed out there, right? This is because we cling on, we cling on to experiences. When we cling on to experiences, we find these experiences familiar. And we like to attach ourselves to what is familiar. So we would rather attach to suffering that is familiar than to face challenges that is unfamiliar. Right? Basically, it's because we personalize every experience. And this process of personalizing our experience is called upadana. We personalize our experiences. Now let's take a look at this concept of mindfulness. And here I'm showing you Dr. Jon Kabat-Zinn, who actually was a psychiatrist, a medical doctor, and he developed this program called Mindfulness-Based Stress Reduction, commonly called the MBSR. He did that 35 years ago. So I'm going to show you a video clip of him explaining this mindfulness-based stress reduction during a conference with the Dalai Lama. So he's explaining it to the Dalai Lama, what is this thing called mindfulness-based stress reduction.
What can meditation and some of its fundamental aspects in terms of mindfulness, how can that help or affect our daily life? Jon Kabat-Zinn for many, many years has been trying to see how bringing more mindfulness in our way of being can help people who are sick, physically, mentally. So he's going to explain his work on mindfulness-based meditation.
Thank you, Mathieu, and Your Holiness. I would like to speak with you this morning about work that my colleagues and I have been doing for the past 26 years now at the University of Massachusetts Medical School. Many of those colleagues are here in the audience, and in fact, there are many people here in the audience who have been doing this kind of work now, as I will show you later. And really, the essence of it is to see as an experiment whether we could not, to the degree of our own understanding, take the essence of Buddhist meditation practice and in some way make it accessible to people who would not find it through a traditional Buddhist or spiritual path, but who nevertheless were plagued by suffering and dukkha. And as you yourself so often point out, suffering is a universal phenomenon. All of our minds are basically the same. All of our bodies are basically the same. And so potentially the Buddha Dharma, if there was some way to translate it so that it would not lose its essential dimensions, but become available to be heard and enacted or embodied by other people, might be valuable. So that was the challenge, if you will, the experiment. And we've now been doing it for 26 years. So stress reduction becomes an incredibly important and potentially interesting vehicle for helping people to reestablish balance and well-being in their lives as a complement to whatever the doctors are able to do for people. So since we call what we do mindfulness-based stress reduction, I think it's fair to ask what is mindfulness, and I really don't need to say much about it after Ajahn Amaro's gorgeous presentation and embodiment of it. It's spoken of often as the heart of Buddhist meditation. We speak of mindfulness. And speaking of mind and heart, a point that you make so often, in all East Asian languages, including, I understand, Tibetan, the word for mind and the word for heart are the same. So we try to emphasize that when you hear the word mindfulness out there in the world, it equally means heartfulness and has to be understood that way. So we define it as moment-to-moment, non-judgmental awareness that's cultivated by paying attention on purpose in the present moment. So I'm going to very briefly try to sketch out the MBSR program because it's been written about a great deal. I don't need to go into great detail. But what we're trying to do is create an environment where people can learn to slow down in their lives and maybe even stop and familiarize themselves with stilling the body and observing what's going on in both body and mind. Cultivating a certain kind of intimacy with the present moment as it is. Now, most of the time, people are very surprised to discover, when they start to pay attention in this way, that they don't live in the present moment. They live mostly in the future, worrying or planning. All of us are that way. Or in the past, remembering things that have happened before and sometimes getting quite bent out of shape about it. So stopping, in some sense, in Western society is a very radical act. Just stopping and then opening one's field of awareness. Ultimately, I believe it's an act of self-compassion. So it's, in some sense, the discovery of the capacity for awareness and wakefulness in one's life.
What Dr. John Kabat-Zinn pointed out is that we have to learn to stop and still the body. And he says, basically, then go on to observe what is going on in both body and mind. So mindfulness is very much learning to stop and still the body. I bring the body to a state of relaxation and then observing internally what's going on in the body and the mind. Cultivating this intimacy with the present moment as it is. That means you're able to experience this present moment and observe what goes on in your body and mind in this present moment. Because stopping itself is something we don't often do. That's why it's such a radical act. To learn that when something happens around us, we just learn to stop. Learn to pause and relax before we react. And ultimately, this is an act of self-compassion and wisdom, to learn to pause and relax before we react to anything. And this helps us to discover a sense of awareness and wakefulness within us. So that is what he described as the main gist of this MBSR program, to help people to do that. And then he defines mindfulness as moment-to-moment, non-judgmental awareness. In other words, being aware of what's going on moment-to-moment, in the present moment, in a non-judgmental way. Don't be judgmental about this, what you are experiencing. And this can be cultivated by paying attention in a purposeful manner, purposefully, in the present moment. Basically, so that we're able to pay attention without judging what goes on. Judgment leads to various kinds of mental proliferation. So it's basically learning to pause and observing the present moment in a non-judgmental way, in a purposeful, non-judgmental way. Now, actually, this word mindful was very well defined by Dr. Pang. Dr. Pang Ching-ka, some of you may know. He has a beautiful definition where where mindful is an acronym. M for moment-to-moment attention. I, in the here and now, focus on the present moment. N, non-judgmental attitude. D, detach from mental proliferation and unhelpful thoughts. F, forgive self and others. Be grateful for opportunities and our blessings. U, unconditional acceptance of past and moving on. L, learning with a beginner's mind and open mind. And this came from the Mindful Gym Handbook, developed by Dr. Pang Ching-ka. Of course, a lot of you know that Dr. Pang is often called the Dr. John Kabat-Zinn of Malaysia, because he developed Mindful Gym, which is very much similar to, or rather, it's a kind of mindfulness-based stress reduction program. In fact, quite a few of these programs are available. I also have a series of programs based on that. I used to run that here, and I hope to run that again this year. So for those of you who are interested, if you can drop me a note and put your name in my mailing list, I will be able to keep you informed when I organize this program. Mine is called Mindfulness-Based Emotional Composure. Learning how to apply mindfulness-based exercises and mindfulness-based training to learn to be more emotionally composed. So this is 7 Habits of Highly Mindful People by Dr. Pang Ching-ka here. Now, let's look at how we can help ourselves. When environmental activity stimulates sense organ and we begin to have these 3 parts of mental experiences arising, and then the body gets disturbed by the biochemical reactions and we begin to feel it. This is the physiological disturbance. And then we begin to experience emotional excitement that disturbs the mind. This is the moment we have to learn to pause, relax, and think. Because when we experience these bodily sensations, even before we have the time to appreciate or understand what's going on, the mind begins. Emotional excitement already started, and the mind begins to proliferate. So we must very quickly, the moment we feel these bodily sensations, to learn to pause, relax, before we actually do anything. Pausing, relaxing is very important. This is the first part of mindfulness training. Be mindful of your bodily conditions. What are bodily conditions? Your heart rate, your breathing, your muscle tension, your body temperature, your facial expression, your voice, your various parts of the body tensions, fist and arm, and perspiration, and so on. Ask yourself, are you experiencing this? The moment you recognize, you realize you are experiencing this kind of thing, quickly pause and relax. Because if you don't, the thing that follows next is emotional excitement, and emotional excitement leads to mental proliferation, and before you know it, you'll be reacting in a very emotional manner, not a very reasonable, rational manner. So paying attention to bodily sensation is very, very important. This is the first part of mindfulness training. When you do that, you learn to pause, relax, and think. And pausing, relaxing is very, very important part. The moment you sense these bodily changes, learn to pause and relax. Basically, it's these 3 steps. Pause, relax, and think. Right? So, when you do that, you're able to choose your thoughts. Choose conscious, rational thoughts. You're able to choose what you want to do next. Something that is helpful, something that can help you improve the situation, improve your health, improve your relationship, something that can help you overcome the trouble you're having. Right? So if you learn to choose your thoughts, then you're able to find solutions. But very often we don't learn to choose our thoughts. We react right away. And allowing this unconscious mental proliferation disturb us. And this unconscious emotion will rule us, take control of us. So realize that, and this was actually mentioned very clearly in a quote by Viktor Frankl. He says, between stimulus and response, there is a space. In that space lies the freedom and our power to choose our response. In those choices lie our growth and our happiness. Which means we got to learn to choose our thoughts, and only through choosing our thoughts can we learn to grow spiritually, and can we learn then to become happier in our lives. Learning to choose your thoughts. Venerable Dr. Punaji, my teacher, he calls this selective thinking. You choose good thoughts, harmonious thoughts, peaceful thoughts, calming thoughts, instead of allowing the emotion to take control of you. So when all this is disturbing us, we got to learn to pause, relax, and think. Because when we do that, it stops the mental proliferation. You are now paying attention to the present moment. When you pause and relax and you pay attention to the present moment, it stops you from thinking about the past. It stops you from imagining about a fearful future that hasn't happened yet. It stops you from demanding for changes in the present moment through your expectations. So you have to calm your memory, your imagination, your expectation. And this is by pausing and relaxing and thinking. And when you do that, it actually leads to a very peaceful chain reaction of calming your emotions. And that begins to reduce the bodily activity. The biochemical reactions that had been started already now begin to subside. So the biochemical activities will subside, and you begin to feel more peaceful. You're no longer disturbed by these bodily sensations. And when you're not disturbed by this bodily sensation, then you are able to think more peacefully, think more harmoniously, and think more resourcefully to overcome your problems. Because we are faced with all kinds of challenges and problems, and if we don't learn to pause, relax, and think, we will have great difficulty trying to come up with solutions to our problems. And when we are able to do that, we will begin to form more wholesome intentions of wanting to do good things, wanting to do the right things, wanting to do helpful, resourceful, helpful things. So that is wholesome intention, and that leads to skillful action. We're able to now do things in a wiser way, in a smarter way. It's more skillful. And when we take more skillful actions, what does it do? It actually creates more beneficial outcomes. Consequences become more happier, and that leads to ultimately our happiness, more harmonious living. Because everything we do, it is basically the action we take that is our karma, and that produces outcome called vipaka, and that comes to change our lives, present life and future lives. And basically this intention, this wholesome intention is called cetana. The skillful action is called karma, and the consequences as a result of our action is called vipaka, which may ripen immediately or they may ripen at a later stage. Many actions, many karma can ripen right away. In a quarrel, somebody arguing with you, getting angry with you, shouting at you, if you learn to be more peaceful, and instead of arguing back and fighting back, you learn to calm that person down, you are creating immediate outcome. Your fruit is ripening right away, that you now have a more harmonious relationship with that person. You're no longer disturbed by this unhappy relationship of argument and debate with that person. So this is what you can do. Learning to pause, relax. Right? In order to choose your thoughts, because the greatest weapon against stress is our ability to choose one thought over another. Good, peaceful, harmonious thoughts over thoughts of reaction, thoughts of vengeance, right? Thoughts of fighting back, thoughts of hurting the other person because I think he has hurt me and I'm unhappy with it, I want to hurt him back. Right? So if we do that, we try to hurt people because we felt hurt, then we are creating consequences in our life. Our action is our karma. It leads to fruits that may ripen, the vipaka that may ripen at a later stage that can come back to hurt us and haunt us. Choosing our thoughts is the result of this thinking brain, the ability to choose our thoughts. And in this thinking brain, cerebral cortex, there are 4 lobes: the frontal lobe, the parietal lobe over the top, the occipital lobe at the back, and the temporal lobe on the side just above the ear. So these are the 4 lobes. Out of these 4 lobes, it is the frontal lobe that is responsible for most of our thinking process. And this is our frontal lobe is taking care of the attention system, the long-term memory, logic, critical thinking, and so on. But it is the last 2 lines, decision making, goal setting, planning, judgment, reasoning, rationalizing, that leads to our happiness or unhappiness. If we learn to choose our thoughts, it's basically exercising that very last 2 lines there. These last 2 lines, actually these are the function of that little small part of the brain called the prefrontal cortex. The prefrontal cortex is right behind your eyebrow, which is underneath that curve in this frontal lobe. The whole of frontal lobe is responsible for all those functions, but around that little curve and underneath there, the prefrontal cortex, that part of the brain is responsible for these last 2 lines, which actually determine our happiness or our unhappiness in life. Decision making. If we make good decisions to do good things, will it lead to happiness or harm? Goal setting. If we set wholesome goals instead of unwholesome goals, if we set the goal of mending relationships instead of fighting back and revenging, will it lead to happiness or harm? We plan our actions. If we plan our actions properly, we are able to then do the right things in a proper way. And we form good judgment. Good judgment can lead to good decisions. And we are able to reason out what is good, what is not good for us. That reasoning. And rationalize the cause and effect in life. Doing the wrong thing can lead to certain harm. Doing good things can lead to certain benefits. So this is choosing our thoughts. Very important to learn to choose our thoughts, and all this is happening with this prefrontal cortex. But the good news is very simple. If you learn to meditate, the learning to meditate, the whole process of meditating, any kind of Buddhist meditation actually leads to development and activation of this prefrontal cortex. Scientists have already discovered that, and this is a unanimous consensus, and they have proven it. There's plenty of empirical evidence to support it. They put meditators through this MRI scan to scan the brain to see what happens, and they found that when people meditate, it actually sharpens that part of the brain called the prefrontal cortex. And specifically the ventromedial prefrontal cortex, that part of the brain that is responsible for decision making that leads to our happiness or our unhappiness. So learn to meditate will help us sharpen that part of the brain so that we're able to make more wholesome decisions. And what are some of these selective thinking? When we talk about past, things have come to hurt us in the past. So we're going to learn to forgive. So forgiveness of past is a very important part of cultivating a more peaceful life. And when we look towards the future, we're often very fearful of unknown things that are coming. Well, don't have to be fearful. Instead of experiencing fear, look towards the future with a bit of enthusiasm. Look forward to something good. And I heard, and this is actually taught by a lot of psychologists. Every day, when you wake up in the morning, before you start the day, before you start doing anything, think to yourself and say to yourself, something good is going to happen today before you begin your day. And when you begin the day, your mind will be focused on looking at things that are going to happen to you that will make you feel good. So be enthusiastic. And very often when we look around us, we are dissatisfied with things that are happening. Instead of experiencing dissatisfaction, why don't we look around us and say what a blessing we have and be grateful. Gratitude towards our surrounding in the present moment. So look towards the past with forgiveness. Look towards the future with enthusiasm and kindness towards the future. And be grateful for whatever we have. It's a wonderful blessing. It is a blessing for all of us to be sitting here sharing the Dhamma. Instead of saying, oh, my life is terrible and so on and so forth. It is a blessing for me to be here. I'm very happy to be here to share this with you. So learn to be forgiving of the past, enthusiastic of the future, and grateful for the present moment. Now, these are not only good for you in terms of the spiritual sense of life. They're not only good for you in terms of the philosophical part of life. They're not only good for you in terms of the psychology of life. They are also good for you from a neurological point of view. Why? I'm going to point out to you. When you experience forgiveness, the brain releases a powerful neurohormone called oxytocin. This neurotransmitter actually helps with empathy and bonding. That means if you feel forgiveness towards the past, it boosts your immune system right away. So you can see there is actually a physiological benefit you can get out of this attitude towards the past. And when we think of forgiveness, there are 3 directions of forgiveness. First, forgive other people who have done things that hurt you. It happens to all of us. Somebody in our past has done or said something that has hurt us, or has failed to do something to help us, and we begin unhappy about that. Learn to forgive them. Secondly, we may be the culprit. We are the ones who have done something to hurt someone. In fact, it might be someone we love very dearly, and when we become very unhappy that we've hurt them, we learn to forgive ourselves. So the second direction of forgiveness is forgive yourself for having hurt other people and having hurt the people that you love. The third direction of forgiveness is forgive yourself for having hurt yourself. Sometimes we do things, make the wrong decisions in our life, and it brings a lot of pain and suffering and unhappiness. Sometimes we fail to do the right things in our life, and that leads to a lot of unhappiness. Forgive yourself for either having done the wrong things or not having done the right things to bring happiness in your life. So learn to forgive in these 3 directions. Forgive others for having hurt you. Forgive yourself for having hurt others. And forgive yourself having hurt yourself. So forgiveness releases oxytocin. Oxytocin actually not only boosts your immune system and helps bonding with the people you are with, oxytocin can also smoothen your skin a little bit. So that will give you nice smooth skins. Good for you, ladies and gentlemen. All right. The next, talking about the future, becoming enthusiastic. The moment you feel enthusiastic towards something, that attitude of enthusiasm, that actually triggers the release of 2 hormones in your brain, or neurotransmitters, dopamine and serotonin. Dopamine is the hormone of energetic reward anticipation. It makes you feel interested. You want to do something. So when you are enthusiastic, you want to do something, right? And serotonin is the hormone of attention and concentration. It helps you pay attention and concentrate on what you're doing. And this serotonin if there is a deficiency in serotonin, it leads to mood swings. It leads to depression, depressive moods. It leads to bipolar syndrome. And in fact, scientists are beginning to discover, although it is not proven thoroughly yet, that deficiency in serotonin could lead to Alzheimer's disease. Now, on the other hand, dopamine, that has been proven. That dopamine, if there is a deficiency of dopamine throughout our life, it could lead to Parkinson's disease. The connection between deficiency in dopamine and Parkinson's disease has been established by many scientists. They have proven it that people who suffer from Parkinson's disease are experiencing, during that period of suffering, experiencing deficiency of dopamine. So therefore, learn to become enthusiastic and excited about things that are going to happen in your life. And then, if we learn to be grateful in our environment, this attitude of gratitude, right? Attitude of gratitude, it actually helps to release a powerful neurotransmitter called endorphin. Endorphin is actually a very powerful natural painkiller. And when we become grateful to things, it actually releases this endorphin, and endorphin makes us feel good. Endorphin helps us heal physical and emotional pain. Endorphin also boosts the immune system in a powerful way. So, and one more thing not mentioned there, endorphin is even more powerful than oxytocin in smoothing our skin. You see, when people smile a lot naturally, in fact, learn to smile. Smile more often. The more you smile, the more you release endorphin. And when endorphin is released, it flushes the face. This is why people who smile a lot, they get very smooth skin. You look around you. Do you see people who smile a lot and often have very wrinkled skin? No, you don't. People who smile a lot, they have very smooth skin because it releases a lot of endorphin. So now you can see there is good medical reason to carry this attitude through life. Forgive the past, be enthusiastic towards the future, and be grateful for the present. And think before you act or speak, because think itself is an acronym. Very, very useful acronym to remember. Think, T, means it is something truthful. So before you want to say something, make sure you are speaking what is truthful. And H is for helpful, that it helps with whatever the problem you are experiencing. I helps you improve the situation, improving your relationship. And N is very important because very often something may be truthful, but it is not necessary. So N is necessary. Say it only if it is necessary. Sometimes telling the truth can hurt other people. And it may not be necessary to tell the truth. Doesn't mean that you tell any lie. No, don't do that. But you may or may not need to say it if it does not help to improve the situation. So N for necessary, and finally, most importantly, K for kindness. Before you speak or you act, make sure that what you are about to say or what you are about to do is a kind act or kind speech. So THINK, truthful, helpful, improving, necessary, and kind. So it's very important to practice our speech and our action using this to guide us in a way. Right? And Bhante Punaji has always pointed out that people are too carried away trying to so-called seek the truth. And he says the purpose of human intelligence is not to discover the truth, but to solve problems. And what kind of problems to be solved, right? Satipatthana or mindfulness training is actually a solution. It is a solution to a more peaceful and happier life. Practicing this. I'm just going to run through it because the only way you can learn this properly is to attend a meditation retreat where Bhante Punaji will then teach you the proper practices of Satipatthana. But I'll just quickly show you what he says about this Satipatthana.
Normally, we experience conflict. What is this thing called conflict? Our mind can be divided into two parts. What we call the thinking part and the emotional part. The emotional part is something that cannot think. Emotions cannot think. Emotions only want things, or hate things, or become angry, or become frightened, or become worried. That is emotion. And emotions are blind. Emotions are not able to become aware of anything. We become aware of the world, we become aware of what is right and wrong, good and bad. All that is done by the thinking part of the mind. What we pointed out was that today the modern scientists who are doing research on the brain, they have found that there are two areas in the brain. One area does the thinking and the other area does the emotional excitements. So what we have to do is try to shut off the emotional part and try to keep the thinking part alive. That is the part that becomes conscious of the world. The emotional part all works unconsciously. So instead of letting the emotional part rise up and do all the bad things, we should shut off the emotional part and start making use of the thinking part and become conscious. And that is what today the Buddha called Satipatthana. Satipatthana, today translated as mindfulness. My translation is not mindfulness. Satipatthana means the introversion of attention. Normally our attention is extroverted. That means we are focusing on what we see, what we hear, what we smell, what we taste, and what we touch. And when we keep on focusing on what we see, hear, smell, taste, touch, we begin to react to the pleasant sights, the unpleasant sights, the pleasant sounds, the unpleasant sounds, the pleasant smells, the unpleasant smells, the pleasant taste, the unpleasant tastes, and the pleasant touches and the unpleasant touches. We are all the time reacting to these things because our attention is focused on what we see, hear, smell, taste, touch. Now, instead of doing that, what the Buddha points out is focus on what is going on inside you. What is going on inside you is your desires, your hatreds, your fears, your worries. When you become conscious of these things, they automatically stop. They can go on only unconsciously. Desires can go on only unconsciously. Hatreds can go on only unconsciously. Fears can go on only unconsciously. Worries can go on only unconsciously. The moment you become conscious, it stops. This is the important thing to understand. But there is a small unfortunate problem. The stopping of the emotions doesn't happen suddenly. It is like turning off the hot plate. If you switch off the hot plate, the heat doesn't disappear all at once. But you switch off the light disappears immediately. But the hot plate doesn't disappear immediately. Even the fan doesn't disappear immediately when you switch it off. It will start turning for some time and gradually it will calm down. Heat is also like that. It is only light that goes off immediately. So this is important to understand. In a similar way, the emotions, when you are angry, if you look at the anger and say, oh, I am angry. And if you can simply look at the anger will gradually subside. But if you think, oh, I looked at the anger, but the anger didn't disappear, it's still going on, and you become angry about the anger, and then, of course, the anger will keep on becoming more and more. But if you can just relax, look at the anger and relax, the anger will slowly calm down. That's how it goes. The important thing is to become conscious of this unconscious process that is going on. And that becoming conscious of these unconscious processes is what we call satipatthana. What is called satipatthana which is today translated as mindfulness, is simply becoming conscious of the unconscious processes. That is the important thing to understand.
So it's really to become conscious of the unconscious process. And Bhante pointed out very clearly, when emotions are aroused and we become emotionally excited, this excitement does not stop right away. It takes time to cool down. This is why it is important for us to learn to pause and relax. Because in the moment of pausing and relaxing, it helps the biochemical reactions in the body to subside. In fact, in the sutras, the Buddha has pointed out that when we are angry, we experience fever. Now, the Buddha was not referring to the fact that when a person is angry, then he gets fever. No, that word fever is actually referring to the biochemical reactions in the body, the hormonal reactions in the body. That's what the Buddha meant when he says fever. And you will find in many sutras, whenever the Buddha pointed out to anger, he uses the word fever to refer to that process of anger. That fever is really referring to the biochemical reactions in the body. But of course, in ancient times, people have difficulty understanding when you say words like hormones. They don't know what that is all about. So in ancient times, fever is an easy way to describe that condition where you're experiencing biochemical reactions in the body. So learn to pause, relax, before you take any action. And Bhante pointed out that the word satipatthana really meant to place the attention within, from the breakdown of the root word sati, upa, and thana, to place attention within. And this is of course commonly translated as mindfulness, but there are really 4 areas of focuses in this thing. This is the introspective awareness. There are 4 areas of focuses of introspection. The first one is the body, commonly called kayanupassana. Kaya refers to the body. Observe the physical manifestation of the reaction in the body in terms of disturbances or tensions in the body. Disturbances to the organs and tensions in the body. Next, observe the feeling. This is actually sensory feeling. Vedananu pasana. Observe the manifestation as feelings in the body, whether it is pleasant, unpleasant, and in terms of whether you experience tension, pain, pleasure, agitation, discomfort, and various bodily sensations. This is really observing these bodily sensations, Vedananu Pasana. And then, the third area of focus is Chitanu Pasana. Observe the manifestation in the form of emotional excitements, or whether it is calmness of your temperament and what emotional states you are experiencing in terms of fear, anger, panic, frustration, anxiety, and so on. This is observing affection, right? Or the emotional process that's going on. Affection is just another word to describe this emotional process that is going on in your mind and your body. And the fourth one is observing cognition. This is Dhammanupassana. Observe the manifestation of thoughts in the mind, how thoughts arise. And thoughts are really the interpretations of circumstances of the past, the present, and the future. So observe how these thoughts arise. Dhammanupassana. So basically these are the 4 areas of focuses. The body, Kayanupassana. The feeling, Vedananu-pasana. The affection or emotion, Chitanu-pasana. And the cognition or thoughts, Dhammanu-pasana. And when you are able to do that, you are able to bring the body and the mind to a level of peace and calm and composure. The first 2 is very much about the body, what happens in the body. The next 2 is really what goes on in the mind. This will help you calm your mental proliferation. And first, observing the body is to observe what goes on here in this bodily condition. And in this bodily condition, the way to observe it is when environmental activities stimulate our sense organs and we begin to experience these biochemical changes in the body and bodily sensations, you are really observing this tension in the body. Kayanupassana, observing the tension in the body. After observing the tension in the body, the next, you will now observe feeling in the body. And this is the Vedananupasana, to observe these feelings in the body, whether it is pleasant or unpleasant, and then in terms of whether you are feeling pain, pleasure, agitation, discomfort, and so on. Having observed that, the next thing is to observe how this emotional process arises. And this is observing this emotional excitement, which leads to distress. So observing this emotional excitement is Chittanupasana, observing the affection, how this emotional excitement arises in terms of calmness of your temperament. And also observe what emotional states that you are experiencing, whether fear, anger, panic, and so on. And having observed this emotional state that arises, the next thing you observe is basically observing your cognition. Because this emotional state that arises, that disturbs your rational thinking, this is a tug of war going on. And therefore you now need to observe how it has disturbed your thinking. Because your thinking, your thoughts that arise, thoughts in the mind, these are really the interpretations of your circumstances of the past, the present, and the future. So observing how these thoughts arise, Dhammanupasana. And when you begin to observe them, you are able to now choose your thoughts in a wiser manner. And choosing your thoughts is basically learning to calm this mental proliferation. Because if we don't, we are not able to calm it. Calming mental proliferation is to bring your mind to a level of mental composure. How we can tame this mental proliferation. Because if we don't, this disturbance from emotions, right, the feeling disturbing the rational thinking, this disturbance is causing what is commonly called, the psychologists call cognitive distortions or thinking traps. It disturbs us and causes us to think in certain patterns. Now, of course, today's sharing is too short for me to explain them, but I'll just very briefly show you what these thinking traps are. There are basically 17 of them. If you drop me your email, and for those people who are already in my mailing list, I will send you a copy of this presentation. You will then be able to receive it. If you haven't received me, if you are not in my mailing list, at the end of this presentation, take down my email address, drop me a note, and you will receive a copy of this presentation. Basically, there are 17 of them. I'll give you some very quick example. When we are emotionally excited and it disturbs our rational thinking, what does it do to us? It causes us to do mind reading, for instance. Mind reading means we begin to imagine what other people are thinking. Now, can you know what other people are thinking? Many people can't even know what they are thinking themselves. How can you know what other people are thinking? But we are clever. We always want to imagine what other people are thinking. So we begin to imagine what others are thinking. So this is called mind reading. Another condition it leads to is fortune telling. We begin to predict the future. Oh, it's going to turn out like this and like that, and we begin to be fearful of things that we are not happy about, of things that we are not sure about. So this is fortune telling and so on. There's 17 of them. So I'll just list through the others. For instance, another one is that we have this perfectionist attitude, should be. We expect things to be the way they should be, ideally, perfectly for us. This expectation, this perfectionist attitude can also lead to a lot of suffering. We always expect things to be perfect. We expect our partners to be perfect towards us. Wives expect the husband to behave in a perfect way as a husband. Husband expects the wife to behave in a perfect way. So we have these expectations of perfectness from other people, right? And there are also others like blaming and shame. So when people are not perfect, when people don't behave in the way we expect them, and they begin to do things and things go wrong, and we begin to blame other people. We point fingers at others, but we don't realize that when we point one finger at others, 3 fingers point back at us. That is when we experience shame and guilt. We look back at ourselves and say, oh, maybe I'm the one to blame. So first we try to find faults in other people, and then later on we find faults in ourselves, and when we blame ourselves, we hurt ourselves. So these are some of the cognitive distortions, or these are thinking traps. It disturbs us to think in a peaceful, harmonious, useful way. by thinking in these patterns of cognitive distortions, it actually leads to a lot of suffering. So if you want a copy of this, please drop me an email at the end. You will get my email address, and then I'll send you a copy of these 17 cognitive distortions by cognitive psychologists. Actually, they produced the first 15. The last 2 are my additions. So when people experience this believing and seeing, first, they look for little evidence that support their beliefs. And secondly, when they see things that disprove their beliefs, they reject all this evidence. So that is believing and seeing. And then the last one, past orientation. We always live in the past. Every time we make a decision, we always refer to the past. We live in the past. We don't live in the present moment. We always think, last time it was like that, the way it turned out, so now I'm going to make decision based on my experience last time. We live our life last time. We forget to live our life this time. Because every moment is this time. But we let past experiences dictate all our decision making. So these are the cognitive distortions. Learn to meditate. There are some severe, powerful benefits. First is it helps the whole body to relax. So on the left is a tranquility meditation that can help us to become more peaceful. It will slow down the heart rate, improve blood circulation, lower blood pressure, enhance the immune system, and it will help calm our anger, fear, and anxiety, and relieve depression. This is for people who just practice basic meditation. You don't have to be an advanced practitioner to experience these benefits. The moment you begin to learn how to practice meditation in a proper way by attending meditation retreats, you will be able to experience this. And then as your meditation practice progresses and becomes more and more skillful, you become more skillful, you will be able to experience what's on the right. You will learn how to abandon this emotional excitement. You will learn to tame the greed, hatred, and delusion that arises, the lobha, dosa, and moha. You will learn to cultivate this introspective awareness in you, the satipatthana. And then you will be able to develop a more peaceful, harmonious mind, cognitive consonance. And finally, you will be able to experience this peace of mind, this stillness of mind, samadhi, which is a form of, which is called mental equilibrium. Your mind is at peace. And finally, from there, you will begin to have greater insight into realities of life. You will be able to see more clearly what is impermanence, what is suffering, and basically you are able to overcome that, and you will begin to realize that there is no self to be affected. Anicca, dukkha, anatta. And from there you begin to have this clear insight. And if you continue there and it progress further, then you will become an awakened being, enlightened. So these are some tremendous benefits you can get. My teacher has pointed out, Venerable Dr. Punanji, the benefits on the left are not difficult to come by if you just only practice, and you can gain it even as a lay person. But if you really want to fully appreciate and fully experience the benefits on the right, then it may be necessary to renounce, right? To be able to reach that final step of instilling mental equilibrium to the ultimate level where you are now able to attain insight into realities. You may need to renounce, because basically he spoke of the Eightfold Path. This is in accordance with the Eightfold Path. The final two can only be experienced when you give up all these sensual pleasures around you. Right? So basically, these are the major benefits of meditation. And with that, I will go with the last slide, that when faced with the changing vicissitudes of life, means things that are happening around us, that are disturbing our thinking, that is continuously changing and creating uncertainty. If the mind can be kept undisturbed, that means the emotions are not aroused and don't get emotionally excited, and we learn to tame our emotions, then we become free from worry, lust, and fear. We will experience the supreme bliss. And this is inside the Mangala Sutta, as the Buddha has pointed out. When faced with changing vicissitudes of life, if the mind can be kept undisturbed, free from worry, lust, and fear, this is the supreme bliss. And finally, we learn to radiate metta, to send love when we see hatred, forgiveness when we see resentment, strength when we see weakness, tranquility when we see chaos, peace when we see hostility, courage when we see fear, hope when we see despair, comfort when we see pain, kindness when we see cruelty, and compassion when we see suffering. May all beings be well, peaceful, comfortable, and happy. I thank you very much for your attention. I come to the end of my presentation.